Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Evolution Network. I'm your host, Joseph Potter. Joining me today is Chris Ransom as we recap the scores from the NFL, hits a few key notes, and at the end of the show, we will run down a few scores from the NCAA college football top 25. And so, starting off, we're going to start off with the early games, and there are a couple highlights we've got from the Browns and Ravens. This is not a very noteworthy game, but a couple points. Joe Thomas passed 10,000 straight snaps without missing a snap. This is not missing a game. This is not missing a down. This guy is the ultimate Iron Man when it comes to the NFL at this point. I don't think anything can compare with the position he plays. He's never been rolled up. He's always kept himself in peak physical condition. Chris, what do you think about Joe Thomas's milestone?
Yeah, I didn't even know about the Joe Thomas milestone, but I did find a photo for this game in the second quarter where Joe Thomas and Suggs were both going up one-on-one. It was hard to tell who won the battle. It felt like both Suggs and Thomas both won their fair share of battles in this game. And at that point, my thought process was, well, Flacco threw a pick. This is the photo we're going to use for this game, because if the Browns come back and win without Kaiser, then Joe Thomas is the man. He gets all the credit, period. And if the Ravens win, you have to give Suggs some credit because he had a sack, he had a forced fumble, and a lot of his pressures allowed Baltimore's defense to get interceptions off of both Kaiser and Hogan. So at that point, we knew this was the photo we were going to use for that game recap, and we were focused keenly on the Joe Thomas Terrell Suggs matchup. But the bigger storyline I wanted to mention was the Kaiser migraine.
Yeah, and here's something about migraines. A lot of people don't know them. A lot of times, most of the times, they will start and come on throughout the day. You may not even know it, but they don't. All of them do not come on, and just hit you. So there is a chance that Kaiser knew this was going on and probably just thought it was a slight headache before the game, and it just hit its peak earlier. But or how it came on is more irrelevant to what happened after. Anybody who gets migraines, I've had my share of them with the concussions I've had. I can tell you now, just because the pain's gone, all the symptoms aren't gone. They could have given him all kinds of medicine. I'm sure they've got it in the back in the locker rooms. When he got out there, I can almost guarantee it, his vision was not 100%. That is something, his senses were not at 100%. He should not have come back into that game. He should not have attempted it. I admire his guts. I admire his fortitude. But, yeah, and part of that has to go on Hugh Jackson, because sometimes you just got to say, look, you're 21, you're learning, you got a migraine. This is going to affect you the rest of the game. You need to just stop for a second, and we can get you back out here next week. He wasn't playing great, but he was playing admirably. I mean, he got him a touchdown, led him on a touchdown drive. I mean, there's a reason that everybody loved this guy last year, and the reason he's earned the backup job this year. He is a capable backup quarterback. Just let him finish the game. You get yourself straight. We got 15 weeks left. Plenty of time for you to learn. Or 14 weeks left or whatnot. Plenty of time for you to make a statement. So that migraine, just because it was gone, just because there wasn't any pain, the symptoms linger. He's not going to make any excuses. I'm not going to make any excuses for him. I'll just say I love Kaiser. Bad decision to come back. In the end, I think it hurt him. Not a good day for him. And couple that with the Ravens defense, which for the second week in a row was swarming. And when I say swarming, I mean these guys were everywhere. And you put that with a 21-year-old with a migraine, and that is not going to turn out well. And it didn't turn out well. Baltimore beat Cleveland 24-10.
Yeah, my final thoughts on this game with Kevin Hogan is I remember during the Senior Bowl week when Kevin Hogan and Cody Kessler were both there. Kessler outplayed Hogan during the Senior Bowl week, but at the same time, two of Kevin Hogan's strongest attributes, he might not have the best arm and accuracy, but his two strongest attributes are his work ethic and his football IQ. And those things make Hogan a viable backup.
Yeah, they do. And there were times he looked really good. There were other times when he didn't. And those two attributes are probably the reason that he looked really good.
Yeah.
Moving on, we have Buffalo and Carolina. This was a really poor game for the most part. Carolina beat Buffalo 9-3. Then we have Arizona and Indianapolis in overtime. This was a game that Jacoby Brissett started for the Colts. He didn't look great. Same time, it's like we were
Greg
talking about.
Olsen broke his foot in the Carolina Buffalo game, and I know
Who did?
And that's a pretty big injury. Cam Newton had trouble getting up at first, but they let him back in the game. It turns out he had a minor injury, so Cam Newton, Derek Anderson didn't have to step onto the field, but Greg Olsen, the tight end for the Panthers, he did break his foot in that contest. Julius Peppers looked very good getting pressure on Tyrod Taylor, but he's expected to miss anywhere between 12 weeks to the rest of the season. So this Greg Olsen broken foot injury is pretty serious, and
I just on NFL Network it had 6 to 8 weeks.
NFL Network is 6 to 8 weeks. Okay,
yeah,
but it's still a pretty big loss for the Panthers.
It is.
The bye week isn't until week 11, so they may not get him back until the bye week or before. So
but Carolina beat Buffalo 9-3. Arizona and Indianapolis, final. Arizona beat Indianapolis 16-13 in overtime. Jacoby Brissett started for Indianapolis. Both of those offensive lines. The Cardinals had injuries. Indianapolis just looked bad. The offensive lines, both offensive lines were bad. Jacoby Brissett, he looked good in spots. When he threw the ball, he looked crisp, held on to the ball too long. Malik Hooker with an interception. Hooker looked good.
They didn't play Hooker last week against the Rams, but they played him this week, and I'm glad they did because
he looked like a great center fielder out there. He was tracking the ball well. So I think Indianapolis might have gotten a steal with Hooker in the draft there.
Center fielder is a baseball term, but it applies to football as well when you're waiting for the football.
Priced free safeties. Then we have Tennessee, Jacksonville. Tennessee dominated this game. I was watching it in the break room at work. Blake Bortles was terrible in the game. He's barely 50% before garbage time.
Looked like they had a hangover in the first half. And then Tennessee got the field goal to end the half to take a 6-3 lead at halftime. Both defenses were playing good until that point. But once Tennessee took the lead, it's like they took over the game from there and they never looked back. And I think the player that was the big key for Tennessee in this game was Brian Orakpo. People will talk about Derrick Henry. They'll talk about Mariota's decision-making. But Mariota struggled early in this game. I think Orakpo was the biggest reason the Titans won. Him and Derek Morgan are a very effective pass rushing tandem, and that tandem is going to be the key if the Titans want to win the AFC South this year.
Yeah, Tennessee's pass rush, we expected it to be a lot better this year. It is worlds better than it was last year. Love what they've done with their defense. If they can keep it up,
And
they're
it's almost
1-1
his third
now.
year as defensive coordinator. He was in his second year last year, and they took strides. He was like an interim coordinator his first year. So this is his second full season as a defensive coordinator for the Titans, and you're already seeing the impact he's having.
And so right now, Tennessee looks like they're poised to make a playoff run. Next game, a game I really liked. I really enjoyed watching. Philadelphia, Kansas City. This game I expected it to be an offensive shootout, and it turned out to be a defensive slugfest. The offensive lines for both teams were excellent because they could have gotten really, really ugly with the pressure that was getting put on by those defenses. But they were able to keep the quarterbacks upright enough to where they could at least get a 27-20 score out of it. I don't think the way those defenses were playing, if those offensive lines didn't play so well, they would have no business scoring much of anything. Kansas City
It's almost like both defenses did really well pass rushing in the first half, flustering Alex Smith, flustering Carson Wentz, using their edge rushers to get by Jason Peters, Eric Fisher, Schwartz, Lane Johnson, getting by those offensive tackles, putting the quarterbacks in terrible situations. And then in the second half, you saw both Peterson and Andy Reid make adjustments, and their quarterbacks got more time in the pocket. And we went from a low-scoring game to a semi-type shootout in the second half.
Yeah, and I don't think people realize that a lot of the reason that this game was probably so evenly matched is that Peterson is an Andy Reid disciple. So Peterson was Reid's quarterback coach in Philadelphia. So I'm not sure how many people realize that, but these guys know each other extremely well.
Also an offensive coordinator on the Chiefs when Andy Reid was in Kansas City too.
Yeah, so these two guys know each other extremely well, and Peterson played for Reid as well. So this was the master versus the pupil, and they just went after each other, and it was a really fun game to watch.
It was. Kels and Kareem Hunt took care of business, but Chiefs are 2-0.
Kareem Hunt is a beast.
He is.
He was breaking. I remember one pass down, I think was the right sideline. He caught it out of the backfield. One person hit him, bounced off. Another person hit him, spun off. He just kept going, kept his feet churning, and he got what should have been a 3 or 4 yard gain. He ended up getting 11, 12 yards out of it. Then later, I think was the third quarter, he busted through a very small hole and ran for like 70 yards. I don't know at this point what you could think, but this is the most potent Kansas City offense since Garrison Hurst, and Hunt is the main reason for it at this point.
Yeah, Hunt is the main reason, and not really surprising when you consider everything he did. I think Travis Kelce was the one player who really stepped up for the Chiefs here. 103 receiving yards, 1 touchdown. Kelce had a big game for the Chiefs, and I figured he'd have no problems exploiting Rodney McLeod and Malcolm Jenkins at safety for the Eagles. Now, I think the best play in the game was made by the other tight end on Philadelphia, Zach Ertz, because Terrence Mitchell dropped the deflection that should have been an easy pick. It was tipped in the air, and Zach Ertz still caught the ball and turned that into a 30-yard gain.
Yeah, because I saw that. I was literally just watching it before we went live. I saw that, and I'm like, he made a huge mistake. It's going to get intercepted. It went off one hand. Mitchell just popped it up with one hand, and he was just running his route. The ball just kept running his route and went straight down the field. It was one of the weirdest things. It was like you were in the backyard, and somebody threw you a ball and you just tapped it over to the guy running the route going straight down the field. I mean, it was a pure backyard play. It was total accident. I mean, I'm not saying Mitchell did it on purpose, but that's what it looked like if you're watching it on television.
I feel like Mitchell's going to be expendable next year because he had 5 penalties versus New England, even though he did cover well at times, and then he had this incident against the Eagles. I feel like the Chiefs are going to move on from him after this season.
Yeah, if he doesn't turn things around real quick, he's going to be on the chopping block. But yet, really had to give it to both of these teams because this was, even in a loss, this was a statement game for both teams. It's like, these guys are coming for you this year.
Yeah,
And
Philadelphia should have no problem beating the Giants on short rest in their home opener next week because they're going to be motivated and fired up after this loss.
Oh, yeah. I think right now both teams are motivated and fired up, and they are ready. And, if I wouldn't be surprised if they keep playing this way if we see them both in the Super Bowl, because these guys are, if they can keep this up for the entire season, it'd be tough to do, but it is highly conceivable that this can be one of the premier matchups.
Yeah, Cal Pope said both of these teams could win 13 games back in the summer show where we broke down every week from week 1 to week 17. He's starting to look pretty sharp for saying that because both of these teams are playing like 13-win teams.
Yeah, it's like, I don't agree with Cal Pope in most of what he says, but right now he looks like he nailed that one head up. Now, on to the next game. New England beat New Orleans 36-20. And Chris, Tom Brady set a milestone that you wanted to break in there.
Yes. 3 passing touchdowns in the first quarter, which was a career-high milestone for Tom Brady. And, I mean, he did make some bad decisions in this game, but I don't think that's his fault because he recognized when he threw one of his interceptions, there were 12 men on the field, and Brady knew that. He pointed that at the official. He got the break. The call got overturned. And then he threw another pick on an offsides play, but that got overturned as well. So then there was a unsportsmanlike defensive holding penalty. So even though Brady threw 2 or 3 picks, they all got overturned due to penalties by the Saints. And Brady was able to capitalize on that. He played smart football, led the Patriots to a win, 3 touchdowns in the first quarter, really got everybody involved, distributed the football well. Rob Gronkowski had over 100 receiving yards at tight end as well, but he does have a groin injury. The status on that groin injury, they haven't said if Gronkowski's going to miss any time yet. That's still up in the air. So,
yeah, and we will definitely be
not have Delvin Breaux at cornerback. So Marshawn Lattimore, who's the number 2 corner on that team, had to move over to the number 1 corner. And Lattimore was a boundary guy at Ohio State, but he did good on Brandon Cooks. And P.J. Williams actually showed a lot of promise versus Chris Hogan now that he's completely healthy. And we talked about him coming out of Florida State, I think, in the first draft we covered. So
I guess the question is, not only is he completely healthy, but, no, I'm not going to say that. It's like, it was only a couple incidents, but he did have some off the field issues coming out, which is why his draft stock stumbled. But he's an extremely talented cornerback if he can stay healthy, and he's done a great job of not having any off the field issues since being drafted. So it's one of those situations where you have an immense talent. You get 2 great young corners with a lot of talent, but you have to nurture those corners, because if you don't, and you don't keep them healthy, then you're not going to get much out of them. But give it 2 years, and you might have a great cornerback tandem in the future.
Yeah, and Rob Gronkowski secured his 69th career receiving touchdown as well. So that's being overlooked due to the groin injury. You even have people on Twitter and the media being a-holes, making jokes about how it's pretty ironic that Gronkowski got his 69th career touchdown and a groin injury in the same game.
Yeah, it's this seems to be a week for milestones. The veterans are Joe Thomas, Tom Brady, Gronkowski. They're all setting their milestones, and I don't think any of them are stopping anytime soon. The next game was a blowout. Sam Bradford did not play, and because of that, Minnesota was completely overmatched. Pittsburgh beat Minnesota 26-9. I don't think Chris, were there any injuries or anything significant happening in that game?
Actually, there was. TJ Watt did get injured in this game. But Bud Dupree did come back, and he did get a sack on Minnesota. And this just shows how expendable Mike Remmers is at the right tackle position. But you paid him for 2 years. You can't release him without losing cap money. So Minnesota's stuck with Mike Remmers for the next 2 years at right tackle. They could draft someone and move Remmers to guard, but at the same time, they're kind of stuck. They're in purgatory mode with a shaky offensive line. And Dalvin Cook did get a rushing touchdown, but he was ruled down at the 1 yard line. So that screwed a lot of fantasy owners. But TJ Watt was questionable to return. He did not return to the game, but they did get Bud Dupree back from his injury in week 1. So it's like the Steelers didn't lose anybody, but they didn't gain any strength either. And they were able to use James Harrison in that game, and they still put up a great effort in a 26-9 win. Ben Roethlisberger, 20 for 30, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. His offensive line struggled to protect him in this game because Minnesota's got a really good pass rush. But Ben kept his cool, made great decisions, and handled himself like a seasoned pro, which he is, a 2-time Super Bowl champion, seasoned pro.
Yeah, and something that I'm going to look at is what's the significance of these injuries, because right now these injuries are they're going to start mounting up at some point. So
yeah, if the Steelers have a healthy TJ Watt, a healthy Dupree, a healthy James Harrison, and a healthy Chicolo, because Chicolo actually looked decent against the Browns. If they have all 4 of those outside linebackers at full health, I think that's their best chance to beat the Patriots. If they have all 4 of those guys, they have a chance.
Yeah.
Because New England's thinner pass rusher this year than they've been in previous years.
Yeah. And I think that the situation with the Steelers with TJ Watt is going to be one of those that they knew he probably could have come back into the game, but they knew they didn't need him, so they played it. And that was what evidently, and well, that's probably what ended up happening in that situation.
Yeah, the groin injury is not serious. Watt believes he's capable of playing, and they're saying this might be a 1 to 2 week injury at best. But at the same time, even if he's healthy and cleared by doctors to play, they're going to use Watt on 2 downs and use Harrison on 2 downs and rotate them versus the Bears next week because they don't want to rush Watt back from this injury. And I think that's a smart decision by the Pittsburgh Steelers, knowing how weak Chicago's offensive line is. They could just rest Watt and start Harrison this game and make sure Watt's 100%, and they'd probably still win. But they don't want to overdo Harrison's reps at his age. So they're going to play both pass rushers on 2 downs versus the Bears next week. What are your thoughts on that really quickly?
Well, I wouldn't play anybody personally that had a groin injury for at least a week, because those things they will linger. I pulled my groin one time and I didn't let it rest the way it needed to, and it lingered for about 3 years, just popping up randomly with a sudden move. So you want to be very careful with that. So rotating these guys because of Harrison's age and the groin injury and everything else, that would probably be what's best for not only the Steelers in the long run, but for the players as well.
Exactly.
So, and
Is the final early game the Chicago-Tampa Bay game, and then we're on to the late
Yes.
games?
Yes.
This game was a 26-9 win. Mike Evans dominated. Well, he
29-7.
didn't have 100 yards, but he was the player of the game, really stepped up, bailed out Winston. Winston actually started this game like 2 for 7. He was a little bit sloppy, and Glennon came out 6 for 6. But the problem is Mike Glennon didn't get any touchdowns. He didn't put any points on the board. He didn't put any food on the plate as far as providing for the team goes. And when you're a quarterback, that's your obligation. I know Ryan was saying they need to put Mitchell Trubisky in. Mike Glennon started this game 13 for 16. It's just 2 of his 3 incompletions were interceptions, and he didn't execute when he needed to. That's the biggest reason the Bears struggled in this game. He actually made some great reads with as little time in the pocket as he had, and he also has his 2 best receivers, Kevin White and Cameron Meredith, on injured reserve, and he's still making pinpoint throws.
Well, I want to, as far as putting the rookie in, just look. Tampa Bay has an extremely formidable defense. Now, I want you to look at what Deshaun Kaiser has done against the Steelers and Browns, and you'll see what a rookie is going to struggle against a more formidable defense. So I don't think putting Trubisky in against Tampa Bay's defense would have helped the situation any, simply because if you look at rookies, especially younger rookies, going in there against a formidable defense.
Pittsburgh and Green Bay on Thursday Night Football, and putting Trubisky against the Steelers to begin his career or Green Bay is not smart, period.
No. It's the only reason that Kaiser's even in there is because, one, the Browns had a bad quarterbacking situation, and 2, Kaiser is extremely intelligent and was able to master the playbook early. So he's intelligent, mature, and knows the playbook. And he was in a situation where it was extremely bad. Chicago doesn't have that. Chicago has a capable stopgap. You do not want to just say, okay, I've got a capable stopgap now, but let's pull that stopgap and put him in against the Steelers. Yeah,
and Mike Glennon beat the Steelers during his rookie season in Tampa Bay at Heinz Field. So you're not benching that guy for Trubisky. No, out of the question.
Yeah, it just wouldn't be especially with some of the struggles. Trubisky had some struggles in a couple of his preseason games. Yeah, he'd have his performances, I said, were overblown. They were. He did well he did well in college. Didn't do as well with what he didn't do as well in college. So they really dumbed down the offense for him. And you cannot go into Pittsburgh or Green Bay with a dumbed down offense. Let him learn. That would, going in against those 2 teams, in that situation with a guy that's not ready, would just hurt his progress in immeasurable ways. So Tampa Bay 29, Chicago 7, final score, final late game.
I think this is a funny tweet. Chicago Bears 24/7's Twitter account. 24/7's a site that's partnered with CBS Sports, but Chicago Bears 24/7, their Twitter feed. I said it in the preseason. I'll say it again. Mike Glennon makes Jay Cutler look like Jesus Christ. The Bears. That's funny.
Well, Jay Cutler actually looked pretty good in the game that I'm about ready to talk about.
You want to open with that game, or do you want to open with the Raiders game against the Jets?
I'll open with this one because I'm just going straight down the NFL Network line right now.
Okay.
And that's Miami and the Chargers. Miami won 19-17. Miami is 1-0. Chargers are 0-2.
And the Dolphins are in first place mainly due to the fact that they didn't play in week 1. So
yeah, and the Jay Cutler, everybody said, told Jay Cutler that Jay Cutler's just coming out from Jay Cutler looked pretty good. He made some good throws on some rollouts. He made some strong throws in the pocket. He didn't look like he was he looked like he didn't have any pressure on his shoulders. Where in the past, where he had the dubious distinction of being dubbed John Elway's, the next John Elway, or going to Chicago where he didn't have any help or anything. He
He didn't
looked
have any
relaxed.
line help in Chicago, and he's got Tunsil and Juwan James as his bookends in
Yeah.
Miami, and that's showing because
Yeah.
those guys are healthy. Mike Pouncey's healthy. Ted Larson, he's
Yeah.
an average guard, but with these tackles and centers next to him, he can play like a above average starter. So they
Yeah.
have
Cutler, for the first time in his career, I watched a Jay Cutler game, and Jay Cutler looked relaxed. And that, I don't think people realize how important it is for a quarterback to look relaxed. And for the first time in his career, Jay Cutler actually looked like a guy who was just going out and enjoying the game and looked extremely relaxed in what he was doing. And he looked so much more smooth because he looked so relaxed in that game.
Yeah, he looked very poised, very relaxed. I believe the Dolphins get the Jets in week 3, so they could be 2-0. I haven't posted the week 3 predictions yet. I'll probably get to that a little bit later tonight, maybe before one of the Monday night games. But Chicago had Jay Ajayi. He had over 100 yards. Jarvis Landry had 11 receptions. He didn't get a receiving touchdown or 100 yards, but he had 11 receptions, and that's huge if you're in a PPR league for fantasy. And Devontae Parker had a big game as well. So that Miami offense under Adam Gase, the staff he's assembled, I really give Gase a lot of credit. And we could be looking at Miami in sole possession of first place in the AFC East heading into October if the Dolphins play the Jets next week. I believe they do. I'm going to double check really quickly.
Yeah, and Miami has, let's not, give people the wrong impression. Miami didn't come out and set the world on fire. They only scored 19 points. But they also didn't look like a team that was going to tank the season, that looked bad. They looked good. They didn't look amazing, but they looked good.
I think if Cutler plays like this against the Jets, they could start 2-0 because they get Josh McCown next week, but that's New York's home opener too because New York had a road game against Buffalo and Oakland. So Josh McCown and the Jets home opener against Miami with Jay Cutler is actually going to be sort of interesting because if McCown plays bad for a third game in a row, people are going to bring up the speculation of possibly starting Bryce Petty or Christian Hackenberg. And you kind of want to see if Cutler maintains this momentum because he's facing a weaker defense in the Jets.
Yeah, and that'll be fun to see, and that leads us straight into the next game with the New York Jets and Oakland Raiders. The Raiders won 45-20, but the talk of the game was Marshawn Lynch got his first touchdown since coming back and did a wicked dance like you would never thought you would see on the sidelines, especially from Marshawn Lynch.
I'm gonna look that up on Twitter. I know that both former Seahawks scored in this game. And when I say former Seahawk Jermaine Kearse scored for the Jets. He was shipped in the trade that sent Sheldon Richardson to Seattle, along with a 2018 second-round pick from Seattle. And Kearse scored and Marshawn Lynch scored. So 2 former Seahawks from that Super Bowl 48 squad scored in this game.
Yeah, and it was a good game for Oakland. It was a garbage game for the Jets. The Jets just keep jettisoning talent, and they are extremely devoid of it. At this point, they put McCown in basically to stabilize the ship, but you can't stabilize a ship that doesn't have a rudder.
Michael Crabtree got a hat trick, though. He got 3 receiving touchdowns in this game, all from Derek Carr.
Yeah, and Crabtree is the he'll drop a pass or two, but overall he is the staple of what it is to be a solid receiver in the NFL. He just goes out. He doesn't make a lot of headlines. You won't even know he's there unless he makes a big catch or a touchdown.
Yeah,
Yep.
and the thing with the Jets is they don't really have a number one corner. They've got two great safeties who can stop tight ends, who can stop some deep passes and zone coverage and intercept some things, but they don't really have a corner to play next to those safeties. You got Morris Claiborne from Dallas along with Buster Screed, and both of those guys are going to have problems against Cooper and Crabtree. And this is a game where Oakland could say, we're not going to get Cooper involved as much because we might want to use him later. Let's get Crabtree involved. Let's jumpstart his confidence. And that's exactly what they did.
Yeah, and the Jets don't have many number ones at anything at this point. So they are in extreme rebuilding mode. So we're going to have to watch and see not when Hackenberg or Petty come in, but when. And
I don't even know if they'll even come in. They might not even play them until they're eliminated from the playoff picture because both of those quarterbacks, Petty and Hackenberg, were so sloppy in the preseason that they don't even want to put either one on the field. I feel like either McCown's going to get injured and one of them is going to step in, or they're going to wait until they're mathematically eliminated from the playoffs and then use the remaining games to start those guys and gauge their potential.
so week 6 then.
Maybe until maybe week 8 or week 9. If the Jets are 0-9 or 0-8 and then they lose a 10th or 11th game, they're mathematically eliminated. That would give them maybe 4 games to gauge the potential of Petty and Hackenberg to see if they've got anything.
Well, if they start 0-7, I think they'd probably be mathematically eliminated at that point. Depending on
Who wins.
Yeah, who else is winning?
Yeah.
Moving on, this was a battle of the draft professor versus the Green Dragon. This was Kerm versus Ryan, Dallas versus Denver, and we're not sure how it happened. I don't think anybody expected it, but Denver 42, Dallas 17. Chris, take this one. Try to make sense of it, man.
The nutty draft professor must have performed some magic strings, or I don't know what happened because Ryan's a good guy, but like the Dallas Cowboys and the Broncos, we know Kerm and Ryan both love these teams, but Trevor Siemian just came out there and executed. He threw a lot of touchdowns, really got things going. CJ Anderson had a lot of success running the ball. This was simply a game where Denver moved the chains and Dallas didn't, and Denver's defense stepped up, made big plays. They played well on offense. They played well on defense. They play okay on special teams. Their kicker didn't miss an extra point. Their special teams didn't play on the level that their offense and defense did, but their kicker didn't miss any extra points or field goal attempts. So we're going to give the kicker a mulligan on that regard. But I give the Denver Broncos a lot of credit. I think the one big loss for Denver, though, is Garrett Bowles did get carted off the field with an injury at left tackle. Denver was still able to score another touchdown even after he got injured, but Garrett Bowles, he got carted off. He was walking comfortably on crutches. People are hoping it is not a serious injury, but they had to drag the cart out, and it's a lower leg injury. He did not return to the game.
Yeah, if it's a lower leg injury, I would think high ankle sprain maybe.
Garrett Bowles' wife says it looks like a high ankle sprain.
Yeah, and those for an offensive lineman can be absolutely devastating. But the professor slayed the dragon on this day, and
yeah, he cried on Menelik Watson's shoulders before being carted off. Garrett Bowles did.
Yeah, and that sucks. I've played on a myriad of injuries, and I can tell you that high ankle sprain is one of the most painful that you'll get. And as anybody who's played on it will tell you, extremely difficult to come back from. Next game, Washington versus the Rams. Washington beat the Rams 27-20. Chris, what did you think of Cousins and Goff?
Yeah, it's but the Bulls, Benjamin Albright just tweeted with the Bulls injury, it's an ankle injury. It's not an Achilles tendon. He didn't tear his Achilles tendon, but it is an ankle injury. So he probably won't be out for the year, but he'll miss some time.
Yeah. And what do you think about golf in this game?
Goff versus Washington. I think
Yeah.
Washington just executed early in this game. Goff looked very sharp versus the Colts, but he looked very sloppy against a effective Washington secondary that looked terrible in week 1, but they bounced back in week 2. Breland was stepping up. Josh Norman had a big game, limited Watkins to 3 receptions, 30 yards, had a fumble, forced fumble, and a fumble recovery as well, and he was blanketing Watkins all game. And you even saw guys like Fabian Morrow and Kendall Fuller come in as nickel or dime cornerbacks in certain passing situations and obsolete Tavon Austin, make Cooper Kupp obsolete. So I'll give Washington's secondary a lot of credit for playing like they're as good as they are, and we'll see what happens. So that's going to be interesting, but Kirk Cousins really avoided turnovers. He played smart football, and Washington got the W. They're 1-1 now. But here's an interesting scenario really quickly. I use playoffpredictor.com to keep track of the simulations, and I updated it from all the preseason predictions I made for each of these teams to who won, who lost. We now have a 4-way tie between all 4 NFC East teams at 10-6, and only 2 make the playoffs. So that would be wild if that happened, if all 4 NFC East teams went 10-6, and Dallas and Philadelphia were the 2 teams that got in due to Dallas sweeping the Eagles and Philadelphia sweeping Washington but splitting with the Giants. So what are your thoughts on that? If all 4 NFC East teams went 10-6, wouldn't that be wild?
That would be unprecedented, and that would be an absolute nightmare for the people who are doing the tiebreakers. But
or they could settle it just by having the owners play Russian roulette. The Mara, Jeffrey Lurie, Dan Snyder, Jerry Jones, they walk into a room, they play Russian roulette, 2 owners come out alive, those 2 owners go to the playoffs. Their tiebreaker solved.
No, they should come over on Wednesday nights, Dos Gatos. We'll play blackjack. I'm sure Brandon will deal them in. We'll have a heck of a time. Whoever leaves with the most chips gets the first seed, and the person who has the second most chips gets the second seed, which would be me, and everybody else just goes home.
So nobody else makes the playoffs, even if all 4 of those teams go 10-6. The winner gets the most chips, and the NFC East, you finish in second, and whoever finishes third, sorry, you missed the playoffs, even if you technically qualify.
Well, yeah, because I would end up in the playoffs. The team that wins would end up in the playoffs. The other guys, it's like, go back home, guys. It's like, you couldn't win. Of course, I got a 1,500 chip handicap, but still.
But yeah, in this scenario, Philadelphia would get the final wild card, and the Giants and Washington would be sent packing. So
yeah, and
Green Bay would host Philadelphia in that wild card game. Is that the next? Is that the game we're going to next?
No, we are going to San Francisco and Seattle.
Oh yeah, this game was a defensive game. I was surprised by how bad Seattle's offense was. I'll give San Francisco more credit than they deserve because their defense really stepped up in this game, and they led 9-6 in the 4th quarter. I was talking about how I thought Seattle was an 8-8 team at best because they didn't have a good left tackle, and they looked absolutely horrendous until Russell Wilson completed that touchdown pass to Paul Richardson. Now they've got to build on that in week 3, and they get the Titans in Tennessee in week 3. Yeah. And it's a game where they have to go from the West Coast to the East Coast. So I actually think there's a good chance they're going to start 1-2 because I just don't see Seattle keeping up with a team like the Titans after the way they played on Sunday.
Yeah, and San Francisco's offense proved that yes, they really are that bad, dropping the game 12-9 to Seattle.
Yeah, if I could see Seattle starting 1-3. I mean, they play the Colts in week 4 on Sunday Night Football, and if Andrew Luck makes his return from his injury in that game on Sunday night, that's going to ignite the Colts to get a win. especially if they lose to Cleveland next week.
Yeah, and next week's Colts-Browns game will be interesting because it'll be the first game that Deshaun Kaiser's not running for his life. Moving on, we've got the game which, well, at least we're safe, but, well, me and Kerm, as far as you go, I think Lisa might murder you at some point. Atlanta beat Green Bay 34-23. This was a surprising game because I was thinking that Green Bay would end up winning this game, putting up more of a fight. I wasn't impressed with what Atlanta did in week 1. I thought they came out extremely rusty in week 1. This game, Atlanta came out firing. Their running attack was on point. Matt Ryan was his unspectacular, extremely efficient self, not making any mistakes, extremely cerebral.
Well, Green Bay's offense dealt with a ton of injuries too. Bakhtiari and Bulaga, I mentioned on the Draft Utopia podcast, how they were both inactive for the game, and they were both standing there next to each other on the bench. They had to put Jason Spriggs in at left tackle. He looked okay, but he's not on the level of those two guys. And they also didn't have Jordy Nelson in that game. Nelson was injured. He was ruled inactive or something at the last. No, he played in the first possession, but he got injured on the first possession, did not return to the game. And Randall Cobb also got injured during that game. So the fact that Aaron Rodgers got 23 points on this defense, which was more than the NFC Championship, with these injuries is a testament to how good he is as a quarterback.
Yeah, and Aaron Rodgers is probably the best quarterback in the NFL right now. He is approaching all-time great levels. He is just one of those guys that he will will his team, even if he can't will them to win, he will will them to be far better than they should ever even hope to be. With all the injuries that Green Bay has, they probably shouldn't have scored 23, but Aaron Rodgers, whenever they have Aaron Rodgers, it is extremely difficult to bet against them.
Yeah, and the Packers-Bengals game just got a lot interesting now because I know Jason Bannell, the writer, fantasy football writer for Draft Utopia, he's a Bengals fan, but he lives in Wisconsin. The last time he attended a Packers game, it was a preseason game against the Bengals. I'm sure he'll be at this one too if he can get tickets because Packers tickets are really difficult to get during the regular season. And I think if those 4 players on offense, Cobb, Nelson, and the 2 offensive tackles are out, I think Cincinnati has a chance to pull an upset in Green Bay. It depends. We're going to have to pay attention to the Packers and their injury report because last year they were plagued by defensive injuries. This year they're being plagued by offensive injuries, and we got to look at how serious and significant these injuries are expected to be because Green Bay should win this game, but if all 4 of those guys are out, I think the Bengals have a chance.
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far, but remember, Green Bay still has Aaron Rodgers, and he still will be playing Andy Dalton. So I would not give the Bengals much of a chance in that regardless. But Atlanta's offense proved to be extremely efficient, and if they keep up the steady play with the pass rush that Atlanta's defense has been putting on the first couple of weeks, Atlanta could be a very dangerous team going forward.
Atlanta goes to Detroit in week 3, and if the Lions win on Monday Night Football tonight against the Giants, both Atlanta and the Lions will be the only 2-0 teams playing in week 3 because I know a lot of the teams that are 2-0 right now are not. None of the 2-0 teams are scheduled to face each other in week 3. So week 3 will not have 2 teams at 2-0 unless the Lions win tonight. So if that doesn't happen, we'll see a lot of 1-0 versus 1-1, or 2-0 versus 1-1, or 2-0 versus 0-2, or 0-2 versus 0-2, or 0-2 versus 1-1. The NFL hates that. So if the Lions win tonight, the only game featuring unbeaten next week will be the Falcons and the Lions in Detroit.
Yeah, and Chris, Are
I
there
just
any
figured that was a good
players
way to end
that
the show.
you feel is going to are there any players you feel are going to stand out tonight in this game?
Well, Odell Beckham is expected to play tonight. He was out last week against Dallas. If he plays tonight, I think the Giants should win. But if the Lions, because the Giants have a really tough defense, and the game is in New York, they're upset about losing. So I expect the Giants to play with a lot more intensity. At the same time, Ziggy Ansah, who was on the PUP list for most of the year, he did play in week 1 against the Cardinals. So he got cleared at the very last minute. So if the Lions are going to win this game, Ziggy Ansah is going to have to step up to the plate, and he's going to have to get by left tackle Erect Flowers, which should not be a challenge for him because Erect Flowers is absolutely terrible. Plus, Ansah's in a contract year. So Ziggy Ansah, I'm looking for Ziggy Ansah to be the man tonight if the Lions are going to win. And if the Giants win, it's just going to come down to Eli making the right reads and the right decisions because he's not going to have as much time in the pocket unless Erect Flowers steps up tonight. So
yeah. Also, don't discount the big play because remember, this could come down to who makes the biggest play. Because remember, Matthew Stafford has great downfield targets in Golden Tate and Kenny Galladay.
got Marvin
And
Jones too, and Eric Ebron at tight end. They've got a barrage of weapons. But go on.
TJ Jones. And then Manning has a lot of guys. Manning doesn't have the arm, but he's got guys who can run after the catch. He's got Evan Ingram, Sterling Shepard. He'll have Odell Beckham back. So don't discount this being a game where most of the scoring is done off of big plays.
Yeah, we could see a lot of big yards after the catch. Brandon Marshall only had 1 reception against Dallas last week, and it was in the 4th quarter. So Brandon Marshall must step up to play tonight because the Lions, their cornerbacks aren't really that good. They have Darius Slay, who I like as a number 2 corner, and he's been effective as a number 1 corner, but he is a guy who's going to have a disadvantage against somebody like Odell Beckham Jr. If Slay can step up and they get another corner next to Slay that plays effective, then the Lions have a chance to win this thing, especially if Brandon Marshall plays as sloppy as he did last week. So there's a number of different factors, but I think Paul Perkins has to be the man for the Giants. He's got to get that running game going because the Lions have Tahir Whitehead. They have Gerard Davis. They've got Nagata in a contract year. So the Lions' run defense is going to have an advantage against Paul Perkins, but the Giants have some offensive linemen like Pugh and Weston Richburg, who are both in contract years. And my writer, Brian Bayless, had a quick question. If Pugh and Richburg are both in contract years, who do you re-sign and who do you let go? Because I don't think the Giants fiscally are going to have the cap space to bring both linemen back next offseason.
That's tough. I mean, they're both guys who can potentially be, assets for that team. So that'd be a tough decision. And I'm not sure that you can go wrong with either one, but Eli Manning may end up having to restructure his contract.
Time to do some critical thinking on this question and end the show on a cliffhanger.
Well, no, because I want to get through some college football scores real quick.
You're right.
We're gonna start off real quick.
So we'll end the Giants question on a cliffhanger, but not the show on a cliffhanger.
Yeah, we'll look into that, and we'll either get back to that one on Sunday or on next Monday's show, because that's a very interesting question and something that deserves an answer to.
Yeah.
And going through the scores real quick, the number 1 Alabama, Jalen Hurts had a great game. 12 of 17, 248 yards, 2 touchdowns through the air, 11 carries, 103 yards, 1 touchdown rushing. Calvin Ridley for Alabama, 3 receptions, 92 yards, and a touchdown as Alabama beat Colorado State 41-23. Number 2, Oklahoma. Baker Mayfield had another outstanding game, 17 of 27, 331 yards, 4 touchdowns. And Marquise Brown, 6 receptions, 155 yards and a touchdown, leading Oklahoma 56-14. Number 3, Clemson. Lamar Jackson had a poor performance, going 21 of 42, but he did have 317 yards and 3 touchdowns as Clemson beat number 14 Louisville 47-21. Number 4, USC. Sam Darnold with a strong performance with 28-49, 397 yards and 3 touchdowns. With Ronald Jones, the second, with 18 carries, 47 yards, as USC squeaks past Texas 27-24. Number 5, Penn State with a whooping on Georgia State 56-0. Trace McSorley, the quarterback, 18 of 23, 309 yards, 4 touchdowns. McSorley's a guy that we've been saying I said last year we needed to keep an eye on. I'm sure we're going to be coming back to him later. Saquon Barkley had 4 receptions for 142 yards and a touchdown. The running back led the team in receptions. On number 6, Washington. This is a game. Jake Browning had an extremely strong performance, 19 of 22, 255 yards, 4 touchdowns. His top performance of the year as Washington beat Fresno State 48-16. Michigan won 29-13 over Air Force. And Chris, what do you think of the top 7 in those performances this week?
Well, this is going to be interesting with college football coming up. Alabama should hold their own. We could see USC and Washington both go unbeaten heading into the Pac-12 championship, and that would have implications on the playoffs. So there's a lot, no movement yet, which is a little bit surprising. I think Clemson, with their win over Louisville, they've jumped Oklahoma, but Alabama and Clemson should be the top 2 teams in the polls just based on what they've done the last 2 years and based on how they've made statement wins. Oklahoma certainly warrants a spot in the top 3. But right now you have – this is interesting. USC was number 4 last week. Penn State actually jumped them in the polls, which is sort of a slap in the face to USC when you consider they had that Rose Bowl win over Penn State. But Penn State is at number 4 now. Saquon Barkley's had 3 consecutive 100-yard games. USC is at 5. Oklahoma State moved up 3 spots in the polls. They have a upward or downward trend on ESPN with the polls, so they tell you what teams have moved up, what teams have moved down. And then Washington, who has a pretty easy schedule, is 7. You've got Michigan at 8, Wisconsin at 9. I'm not looking at Ohio State as a playoff team right now. They're not out of it, but their loss to Oklahoma puts them from 2 to 10, putting them in a win-out mode. And you've got all these teams in the top 9 who are all without a loss at the moment. So those are the teams I'm looking at specifically. There's some other unbeatens like Georgia at 3-0 right now. Virginia Tech is at 3-0. They've got a great cornerback tandem in Brandon Facey-Son and Adonis Alexander, 2 2018 NFL draft prospects at cornerback that we're going to need to study more. Facey-Son can be effective, but he suffered a season-ending injury last year. So him and Adonis Alexander are playing next to each other. And if both of those corners are fully healthy, I wouldn't rule out the idea of Virginia Tech possibly being a sleeper in the ACC championship. Miami could be a sleeper as well. I just got this gut feeling about Miami. They're putting up a really strong recruiting class, but it's a wait-and-see thing with them. TCU is 3-0. They play Oklahoma State this weekend. That's going to be a huge game because last year Oklahoma State blasted TCU 31-6 in Bedlam. This year it's in Texas. So TCU, a huge home game against an unbeaten Oklahoma State team that just came into Heinz Field and beat the snot out of Pittsburgh. So
yeah, and speaking of Oklahoma State, the top performer this week at quarterback was easily Oklahoma State's Mason Rudolph, 23 for 32, 497
yards in the first half, Joey. I was watching this game on ESPN because I was expecting when they did the schedules for college football, they had initially had the Notre Dame-Boston College game on at noon, but they flexed that to 3:30, and they moved the 3:30 game, which was the Pittsburgh game against Oklahoma State, they moved that from 3:30 to noon. So they swapped the time for both of those games and aired both on ESPN still. So
and
I got to see Mason extensively, and while he did make some mistakes, you have to overlook that because he avoided turnovers and he played an incredible game.
Yeah, and Oklahoma State 59, Pittsburgh 21, as you said. Wisconsin came into the week at number 10 with a scrubbing of BYU 40-0. LSU came in number 12, lost to Mississippi State
38-7 or 37-7 by
37-7. Yes. Georgia whooped Samford. Auburn beat Mercer 24-10.
Washington State improved to 3-0 as well. So Mississippi State went from being completely out of the top 25 to moving up to number 17 in the polls just because of that statement win over LSU. And when you're in the SEC, I can't emphasize how huge it is to beat a team like LSU by 30 points. That does wonders for your resume. And Mississippi State in at number 17 as a result. Washington State's still unbeaten at 3-0. They play USC in a few weeks on a Friday night, so it won't be an NFL game. That'll be a fun game to watch, Joey, because there won't be NFL on that night, and that'll be a big game. I think it's September 29th. You get to see Sam Darnold versus Luke Falk in Washington State in Washington, so that's going to be a fun game to watch because I'm curious to see if Falk can outplay Darnold with home field because he got benched in the one game against Boise last week, but he really bounced back versus Oregon State. So Luke Falk and Sam Darnold in a couple of weeks on a Friday. That will be fun. Florida beat Tennessee on a Hail Mary, so they moved from 25 to 20. Tennessee was like 24, and the other unbeaten still in the top 25 are South Florida, 3-0. San Diego State beat Stanford. Yep, they got a huge road win off of Stanford, and they've moved into the Pac-12 conference, I believe. So San Diego State's in the Pac-12 now, I think, and Utah and Oregon also won. So
yeah, and going on for numbers, coming in number 16, Virginia Tech put a scrubbing on East Carolina, 64-17, behind Cam Phillips's 14 receptions, 189-yard, 3-touchdown game. Kansas State lost to Vanderbilt 14-7.
Kern brought that up on the podcast on Sunday, and we mentioned Virginia Tech's corners. So I'm not mentioning the teams that have lost in the top 25. I'm basically giving them the silent treatment to let them know I'm disgusted with how they've played so far.
All right, so Chris, you have earned Chris Ransom's disgust, losers.
Florida State is 0-1, but they lost to Alabama, and they haven't played in 2 weeks due to Irma. So they're the one team with a loss along with Ohio State that probably has the best chance to make the playoff. And everybody else who's lost, thanks for playing. See you next year.
Yeah. San Diego State beat Stanford. TCU.
Palo Alto is even more impressive.
Yeah. TCU won in a high-scoring matchup against SMU, 56-36. Washington State
to 0 receiving yards, 1 reception, 0 receiving yards for 4 quarters. That's impressive.
And here is what you were talking about: Washington State beating Oregon State. Luke Falk, 37 of 49, 396 yards, 6 touchdowns, with Tavares Martin Jr. getting 10 receptions, 194 yards, and 3 of those touchdowns. Florida, as you mentioned, beat Tennessee 26-20 in a game that really was that game was really a defensive matchup up until the last 8 minutes or so. And even then, it was still defensive heavy with a lot of big plays from both teams.
Even though these teams have fewer prospects this year than they've had in previous years, this game still was a fun game. Notre Dame Boston College was fun until about the 4th quarter, the 3rd quarter. This game was fun until the very end. It was another close one, with Florida barely prevailing.
Yeah, and we're going to end this thing on UCLA losing to Memphis.
Memphis has a good quarterback in Riley Ferguson, who I have a 3rd-round grade on and a sleeper. He's one of my 2 sleepers for the draft.
And this was a quarterback-heavy game. Josh Rosen, Riley Ferguson, Rosen, 34-56, 463 yards, and one of the most statistically accomplished games of his career, going 34-56, 463 yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 8.3 yards average. And then Ferguson on the other end, a guy we're going to have to watch, 23 of 38, 398 yards, 6 touchdowns, 1 interception. So
he had a sloppy opening game, but he rebounded in a very big way to the point where he's back in that third round discussion. I don't think he's in the first or second round discussion, but I took him out of my third round after a sloppy opener where Memphis lost, and then I moved him. I'm going to move him back into the third round this week because he beat UCLA. Because I remember we were going over some of the scouting reports for these QBs a few weeks ago, and we got to Riley Ferguson right after we finished the Josh Rosen summary when you got off the call.
Yeah.
So I figured Riley Ferguson, he deserves a shout out on my show as well as the Evolution Network, because
and he had an extremely excellent game. And remember,
I like him better than Paxton Lynch. But the problem is, in this draft, being Paxton Lynch means you're a third round prospect. The last 2 drafts, you could play like Paxton Lynch and go in the first round. This year, if you play like Paxton Lynch, you're a third round pick.
Yeah, and let's remember, he's a senior. That means he's got a lot more avenues. He's got the Senior Bowl. He's got the Combine, the Pro Day, Regional Combine.
A third stringer at Tennessee behind Joshua Dobbs and Nate Peterman. But because he lost the starting job to Dobbs, he transferred to Memphis.
Yeah, and so that is something that we're going to have to watch. I think those 2 quarterbacks, Rosen, even though they lost and Rosen had 2 interceptions, I think he still had a very good game. Same with Ferguson.
5 or 6 throws into coverage in this game, but he made too many big plays in this contest for you to say, he's not a first-round quarterback. He made too many big plays.
Yeah, so, and a guy that we're also going to have to keep our eye on here, well, 2 guys actually. Darren Andrews, the wide receiver from UCLA, had 10 receptions, 175 yards, and a touchdown.
The other guy we need to keep an eye on is Anthony Miller, 5'11", 190-pound wideout for Memphis, number 3 on the Memphis Tigers. He has the same height as Christian Kirk, and Christian Kirk only had 5 receptions for 60 yards on UCLA in the game where Texas blew the 34-point lead. This guy torched that UCLA defense. He is a senior, and he's the son of the former Dallas Cowboys receiver, Anthony Miller. So he's the son of him. So
this is
Chris Carter tweeted about how good Miller was in this game too. So he's on the map now.
He is definitely on the map. His first game, he only had 2 receptions for 23 yards. This game, he just absolutely exploded onto the scene. So he is a guy who's probably going to be climbing up draft boards extremely quickly if he continues this type of production.
At USC, because Burnett had 100 receiving yards in each of the USC wins over Western Michigan, Stanford, and Texas. And Tony told me to keep an eye on him as a riser. I love the route running. I love the tape with Burnett. So I'm probably going to make Burnett my number 1 receiver in tomorrow's mock draft for USC, because Darnold is an incredible weapon in Burnett that's bailing him out. And the rest of his receivers are just dropping passes.
Yeah, and right now we have some breaking news that just came across the wire. ESPN staff writer Adam Rittenberg has just confirmed that Auburn has dismissed backup quarterback Sean White following his weekend arrest, with the statement from Coach Gus Malzahn saying he has made poor decisions that we're best interest of our program and, more importantly, himself. We appreciate his time at Auburn and wish him nothing but the best. White started 16 games the past 2 seasons. He was suspended for Auburn's first 2 games this fall.
That's not really a surprise, though, because Jarrett Stidham is a sophomore redshirt. He was a 5-star recruit at Baylor. We saw him start a few games at Baylor 2 years ago. Then he transferred to Auburn, and he beat out White for the starting job.
Yeah,
and he's draft eligible this year, too, so he could declare as a sophomore redshirt, even though I think he should stay and get his degree.
Yeah, USC outside linebacker Porter Gustin has a strained bicep and is a 50-50 shot for this week against Cal. And that's from Kyle Benagru from ESPN. Phil Steele from ESPN tweeted Gamecocks wide receiver Deebo Samuel has surgery on his broken leg and is out for the year.
That's unfortunate because Deebo Samuel was one of these guys that Tony Mario had a second-round grade on. Now you got that. Deebo never had 1,000 receiving yards at South Carolina. He never had double-digit receptions or touchdowns, but he has speed, like 4.3 speed. Like you're talking maybe 4.2 speed. Like after John Ross, I think this is the only guy who could come within milliseconds of touching John Ross. And I don't think anyone's going to do what Ross did at the Combine this year. But if anyone does, it was going to be Deebo Samuel. And now this injury, so that's unfortunate for him. Because now scouts are going to say he has durability concerns.
Yeah, staff writer Jake Trotter put out that Baylor coach Matt Rule said about Oklahoma quarterback Baker Mayfield, his ability to create, to move, to make things happen. I've seen it on TV, and now that I've seen it on tape, it's unreal. Players you only see once in a while. What are your thoughts?
Bears director of college scouting said that Mason Rudolph has all the intangibles you want in a quarterback on tape. Josh Rosen doesn't, which speaks volumes about Mason's leadership. Now, I don't know what the Bears director of scouting is doing looking at quarterbacks. I feel like he's in John Lynch mode where he's trying to trick a team into taking a quarterback so he can get a player he wants in the second round.
And Jake Trotter also said that Rule said that running back Terrence Williams will play against Oklahoma after being out with a shoulder injury.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in the news right now with these quarterbacks and with everything going on. So,
yeah, Myron Metcalf said that Oklahoma's Mark Andrews said he's ready to go full speed against Baylor. Jake Trotter is, I mean, these guys are just.
Yeah, Mark Andrews is a really good tight end. He is a sophomore redshirt, and he's a guy who I've seen go in the top 15 of a lot of 2019 mock drafts, but he could declare after this year, and he's Baker's biggest asset right now. So if he does declare in a weaker tight end draft, would he be the first tight end drafted in that situation?
It's a possibility. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on right now and a lot of great performances this week. So it's definitely a possibility.
I mean, we'll just have to keep waiting and seeing.
Yeah.
The receivers, it's hard to evaluate the receivers because the guys like Kirk and Sutton that we expected to dominate are struggling. Then you got these other no-name receivers who are just coming out, putting up these monster games to the point where we need to start giving them respect. And that's going to screw up all the receiver rankings for the draft. Plus, you're going to have guys like Robinson, Martavis Bryant, Larry Fitzgerald being free agents in March. So for that reason, I don't think we'll see a receiver taken until the 17 through 32 range because with all this topsy-turvy with the receivers in college, as well as all the options for NFL receivers and free agency next year, the 2014 draft was a draft for the ages at the wide receiver position. And with all those rookies who weren't in the first round being free agents, teams are going to jump on that first, and then they're going to look to additional weapons in the draft if they need them. And with all the topsy-turvy, with all the parity going on at receiver position right now, it's too complicated to consider the idea of a receiver over a veteran free agent. It's just not smart.
It's not. And right now, I'm just reading from Jake Trotter. TCU coach Gary Patterson just painted a target on his back. Trotter didn't say that. I said that. TCU coach Gary Patterson asked for his impressions on Oklahoma State. His response, well, they haven't played more than a half yet. So
Mike Gundy's mullet will overwhelm Gary Patterson. I mean, they beat TCU 31-6 last year, but it's a road game, and TCU's cornerback is a lot better. So I'm thinking it's going to be like a 2017 defensive game, but Oklahoma State's going to find a way to prevail because they just have too much on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and our final little piece of news right now is Texas coach Tom Herman said from Sam Conn Jr., ESPN staff writer, Texas coach Todd Herman said that when the Longhorns return to practice Tuesday, Shane Buechele will have reps with the first team. The true freshman who started the last two games will get reps. Herman declined to name a starter for Iowa State's game.
More confidence with the injuries Texas is having at quarterback. Buechele got a lot more confidence as the game progressed, and I feel like the media put a chip on Texas's shoulder all this week because people were saying, NFL scouts were saying, Malik Jefferson just doesn't have the instincts to be an NFL linebacker. But Malik Jefferson just came out and he had his best game of the season versus USC. Really made a lot of big plays. Sure, he blitzes too much. He doesn't wait for plays to develop. I know Ryan loves guys with big playability, but you need instincts if you're going to play linebacker in the NFL. And you saw much better instincts from Malik Jefferson this week. I sort of feel like the scouts trashing him actually motivated him to play a better game. And he had 2 tackles for a loss against Southern California. He also had his first career game with double-digit tackles, with 11 total tackles, 9 of them being solo. So Malik Jefferson finally put together a signature game that makes him look like a first-round prospect. And he salvaged his stock because he was a fringe first-rounder, and scouts were saying he lacked instinct, and that is never good because if scouts are saying that, then you need a statement game where you have 11 tackles, 2 tackles for a loss to salvage your first-round stock, and that's what Malik did. So Malik, I'll give him credit. He had a big game and really stepped up to the plate for Texas.
Yeah, and on that note, we are going to be signing off. Thank you all for listening. Like, share, subscribe. We'll be glad to see you. Leave us a comment, what you liked, what you didn't like. And as always, for Chris Ransom, I am your host, Joseph Potter. Thank you for listening to our weekly recap, and have fun for the rest of your day, and take care.